big posterity. Yeah. My mother had 6 children, and she had, I don't know how many grandchildren, but a ton of them, and those grandchildren all had large families. So, anyway. Come on in. So James, my nephew, this will tie in with you. James's sister lives right close to Dennis and Chris and her. And James married his sister's best friend. And there's some years difference because his sister's younger. He married his little sister's best friend. They lived in Chicago at the time. I mean, when they were growing up. They met up, I mean, they reconnected here. She was just graduating BU and he was attending BU. So there's nothing more wonderful than family. Say that, but, oh, okay. I have an uncle that was served time in prison for murder. I have an aunt who was in a mental hospital for 20 years. I mean, you get all kinds. Hey, come on down. Let's play music. Oh no, we gotta wait for James to come back. I don't want him to miss. And my daughter, she calls me up and she says, "Dad, I saw the video. I saw the video. It was so fun." She watches my class. You know, I don't know if you know it, but we tape these, and then it's on YouTube. You have to miss a class, you can go to YouTube and catch last week's lecture. I don't advertise that because no one would come. They just wait a week and watch the video. So, any questions about anything? Be sure to check the board up here. You might be on my Ryan. You go by Ryan?
I don't.
You don't? No. You go by Mahoney?
I do.
Awesome. What did you put on one of your papers? You put a different name?
I probably put Mahoney, or I put R.
R. Is that your middle initial?
Mahoney is the middle name.
Oh, and your first name is?
Ryan.
Ryan. Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. Am I on this blacklist? Get me off of this blacklist. Well, just turn your work in. And when everybody's work is due, everything is due. You got 5 films, 6 assignments, all due next week. Hopefully tonight. But then that's it, you know? That's it. We're going to take the test next week. Second part of class. You have to come to class and pretend like you're listening when you're cramming for the test.
Yep. Sorry, my brain can't.
Pardon me?
Good. I don't know why.
Test is next week during class. And there's, I know, it's printed today.
Yeah.
Yes, but I extended it a week. So there's a study guide there that'll help you. If you think you're really ready to take the test, I'll let you take it after class. Or you can take another week.
Do you have it here with you?
In my office.
Oh, I said, just take it while you teach.
Yeah, I know. Maybe something worthwhile to do while I'm talking. James, where are you, buddy? Oh, right. I knew my butt was good for something. It's actually good for skiing, my butt. Yeah. It gets a lot of use on the slopes. Does it get black marks all over it? So this is my wife of, oh goodness, I hate to say it, 50 years we've been married. And we didn't marry young, we were both old. So do the math. So anyway, that was us a couple years ago up at Bryan Head. We've been married 50 years. I live to tell about it. That's the main thing. So, James, Probably, bud. That's his music. Listen to music while we're waiting for it. You've got stuff to turn in. Oh, you want something to do?
Yep.
Go ahead and play it. Let me see. We'll come back to my picture in a few minutes. Anybody know who this is? Anybody know who the artist is? Boys to Men. Are they the real deal? Just one of these. Had a lot of snow this week, haven't we? Record snow in Salt Lake area. Really? You didn't know? They got 8 feet of snow last week. That's that on the slope. And down in the valley, they had a couple feet. So, how many of you moved here because you don't like snow? Yeah. How are we doing so far? Pretty good, huh? Got a little bit of cold weather. We get snow. We have one snow day a year for the kids. Because we don't have any snow removal equipment. So if there's any ice or snow on the roads, I wonder if you turn that thing on and left, come back, pick it up later. Can you see there any lights on that thing? Is it running?
I don't know. That's it. Oh, it's going.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Good, I'll start my monologue
Counting
then.
it pause.
It's not on pause?
Yep, you're good, you're good.
Right?
I'm running.
Yeah,
Okay.
it has
So
the-
here's the deal. We're going to talk about skiing this week, all right? Thank you for the music. So anyway, years ago I decided I was going to be a downhill skier, not a cross-country skier, when I found out how far it was cross-country, you know? Go down. Those guys work. And these guys just dodge trees, you know what I'm saying? Skiing's not easy though. If it was, it would be called snowboarding. Yeah. The slopes are overrun with those guys. Have you noticed? Overrun with snowboarders. Now, there's a few resorts that have limited snowboarders not allowed, like Deer Valley. But how does a snowboarder introduce himself on the slopes? Excuse me, dude. Sorry, dude. As they run over your ski tips, you know. The main difference between skiing and snowboarding is deciding whether you want to hit the tree face on or straddle. That's your choice. Skiing means you have to deal with cold winter weather. Where's the global warming when we need it most, right? Whoever wrote the song "Dreaming of a White Christmas" never had to shovel snow. Yeah. I remember we moved here. We were loading the truck. We moved to the Salt Lake area. Loading the truck, and we were in the garage just finishing up. And I went over to the snow shovels, and I was all ready to stick them on the back end of the truck. I'm not taking those things. They never made it. Snow is made out of water, right? Is that correct? How many calories are there in water? How many calories? None. Then how come all snowmen are fat? Hmm? Injuries, seems like every time I go skiing I get injured. Is that what they call it, winter break? So one time, my knees were so severely injured in a skiing event that I had to give up praying for 2 years. You want to run that by you again? My knees were so severely injured I had to give up praying for 2 years. All right, enough of that. That didn't go over so well. I thought they were pretty good. All right, so let's talk about freedom. And was that running all this time?
Uh-huh.
Okay, you can go home and watch the jokes, see if
Oh, good.
they measure up. So, Civil War, okay? Oh, let's hear a little Dixieland. The war ends, hostilities end. Everyone goes home. Oh, there is a small military force present, but most people go home. All except for the 750,000 men and boys that were killed, they all go home. These are two anthems. Actually, it looks like they adopted this for World War I too, but it's really a Civil War song. Let's hear it. Let's do about half of it. We're going to have songs, the lyrics. Okay, you got the drill. Let's hear the other anthem. That was for which? The South or the North? Those are Northern boys going home. Let's hear what the Southern boys were singing when they came home.
Is this the first one?
I don't know. Can we still say the word Dixie? Has it been wiped from the memory of our institution? Ooh, we don't need that. McClellan. That's Stonewall Jackson. And Robert E. Lee, greatest military general ever produced in America. He was fighting for the wrong side, I guess you might say. Huh? Again, no lyrics. That's all right. Robert E. Lee. Dixieland. Now you got to know this: that Confederate flag that you see in these clips was never a part of the Civil War. That was something that came afterwards. It had a white flag with stripes and with a little thing up in the corner that had stars. But it looked too much like a surrender flag, so they quit using the white flag. It wasn't until after the war was over they decided on that as their national emblem. Okay, and then it was over. Like, okay, that's enough. Yeah, now that blue flag was one of the flags that they used during the Confederacy. Well, if you suppose you're a slave and you're out in the fields just working and sweating, and all of a sudden a man on horseback rides through the countryside saying, "The slaves are free. The slaves are free." What would you do? I mean, in the first place, you even have a concept of what freedom is. It's been bred out of you that you are a servant. You're always to have servitude. That's your life. It's your destiny. Well, what would you do? Would you say, "Oh, great, I got a cousin in Chicago, and I'm going to round up my family, and we're going to head for Chicago"? You think some of them did that? Maybe they were just basically frozen in space. What do you do? I mean, so we're free. What does that mean? What are the implications of it? So anyway, General Sherman, he rode into town, and this was early in 1865, just months before the war ends. And the first, one of the first people that he meets in Savannah, Georgia, was a preacher named Frazier. And Frazier was a black Baptist preacher. And so General Sherman said, define slavery. And he said, well, that's when you're forced to work against your will. That's slavery. Well, that's just like living at home, isn't it? Did you notice a big drop when you came here? When you became your own person? Weird feeling, huh? Well, what is freedom? He says to be able to reap the benefits of your own labor and to take care of yourself. Now, what would a young person of today say freedom was? Freedom to do what? Your generation, how would they define freedom? Free from anybody telling you what to do. Parents or employers, teachers, or anybody. Well, he said, you're truly free when you're able to work and take care of yourself. And how is this to be accomplished? Sherman said, and he said, well, if we had land, if we had our own piece of ground, we could till the ground and we'd be free. And so Sherman says, done deal. So the plantation owner, when Sherman rolled into town and was burning everything in his pathway, where do you think the plantation owner was? Think he was sitting on the porch waiting for McClellan to walk in? Where was he? They disappeared, didn't they? Now they left their slave lords there, no doubt, but they were gone. And so McClellan says, okay, this 1,000 acres, we're going to divide up into 40-acre plots, and all you slaves that work for this guy over here, raise your hand, okay? Come sign up. I just gave you 40 acres of free land for you. And I'm going to give you one of our surplus mules. The war's about over. We don't need all these. Well, I'll give you a mule and a harness, and you can go to work. And so they went to work and they built their little cottages. They moved out of the slave ghettos. Have any of you visited a national park that is a former plantation in the South? You should do that, because the little shanties are out by the river, and there's a big, beautiful lane, tree-covered lane that leads up to this mansion where the slave holders lived, and these other people lived in little shanties, the size of your bedroom, several people. Well, it's a real humbling experience to see how the slave conditions were. Well, he gave them 40 acres and a mule. They went to work. They built their little houses. They built some outbuildings, corrals, and they started raising chickens and planting and getting ready for a harvest that would not come. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Well, how were black institutions? We're talking about individuals. They're now free to do what? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But how did it affect institutions? The 13th Amendment comes along, and it abolishes slavery forever in America. And so, immediately, black men sought to reunify their families, because their wife got sold, somebody, their children were sold somewhere else. They didn't even have last names, and they didn't have good records. In your textbook, it talks about one man's plight. He searched for 600 miles, never found his wife. What a tragedy. You're free, but where would you go? If you were a woman and you were free, where would you go? What would you do? Well, then shortly after comes the 14th Amendment, which says that if you were born here, regardless of race, you are a natural born citizen. Now, we got a lot of people working that system today. You've got south of the border kind of people, they want to come here and have babies, so their children are natural born citizens. Mom and dad are foreigners or aliens, whatever you want to call them, undocumented. But their children, if they're born here, now, Chinese are onto this too. In San Francisco, they have a whole bunch of these huge apartment buildings the Chinese own. They send their pregnant women here on a travel visa. They stay long enough to have a baby. The baby's a U.S. citizen. So some people feel like this wasn't specific enough to just give everybody citizenship because they were born on this side of the border. So then the 15th Amendment that says blacks have the right to vote. So families began to unify, and there's a roles are redefined. Men say, I'm going to work the fields and provide for my family, and you're going to keep the family intact and raise up a good family. And it was a badge of honor. My wife is a housewife. They thought that was the ultimate of freedom, was to allow your wife not to have to labor and have her bleeding fingers come back after picking cotton all day. Yeah, so there was that, and then there was churches and schools. Well, I'm not going to the Methodist church anymore. we're going to make our own church. They build these little one-room schoolhouse / churches, like Little House on the Prairie. And it was used as a church on Sundays, and it was used as a school during the week. And many of these in the South still exist today. And then there was political freedom. Okay, they had the freedom to be a family and to live their own lives privately and freely, and they were able to worship how and where they wanted, and be schooled. Children could get an education. So you remember, many of the laws prohibited blacks from being taught to read and write and such. No, everybody's can go to school. So then they sought for freedom. And that 15th Amendment finally gave them the right to vote. But before that, Frederick Douglass, if you're looking for a black hero, he's the one. He is the George Washington of African Americans. He is the one that enabled freedom to happen. He worked very closely with Abraham Lincoln and was integral in the Emancipation Proclamation, and then later was a counselor to Lincoln as these amendments came around. Well, he said without a vote, freeman, if that's on the test, what's a freeman? It's a black person. Black person who's now free. Have the stigma of inferiority. If you can't vote, if you're free and you can't vote, what good is it? You've got to have the right to vote. And eventually it came for them. But on the 4th of July, blacks would take an American flag and they'd walk up and down the town streets and they'd play the drums and sing and celebrate. White people in the South would go in their houses and pull the blinds and plug their ears because they felt their freedoms had been taken from them. Their whole lifestyle had been stolen from them. So that's the difference. So let's go to page 3 of the notes for a minute. So, let's read this first. Now, I'm sorry I didn't provide the page number, but this is a direct quote from your textbook. With the killing of Lincoln, Johnson became the 17th president. He was killed just a week after the war ended, and after he was inaugurated for a second time. Andrew Johnson was a lonely, stupid man who believed the Negro had no place in Reconstruction. So the feeling of the broader country was, well, we pretty much destroyed the South because they had a slash and burn policy. Atlanta was burned to the ground. How many of you saw the film Gone with the Wind? that scene of burning Atlanta, that was actually the first scene filmed in that movie. They didn't think they'd have enough budget to do it at the end, so let's get the Atlanta burned to the ground, and then hopefully we'll be able to finish the film. But just think of it, Atlanta's one of the premier cities in America today, like Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. But it was nothing, it was a pile of ashes in 1865, 150 years, nothing. So anyway, Andrew Johnson, how did he ever become vice president? And my wife says, oh, why can't we have Mike Pence be president and not Donald Trump? I'd be so much happier. And I said, you want Mike Pence? Give Trump 4 more years and then you'll get Mike Pence. That's how it works. She wasn't ready to do that. But anyway, how did he become vice president? He was from Maryland. He was pro-slavery. He was a Republican with a tiny R. And why did Lincoln choose him to be vice president? The answer is because he knew the war was winding down, and then we'd have to go into Reconstruction. And if he had a vice president that was sympathetic to the South, the people would be more likely to cooperate with the Union forces as they come in to rebuild a society. They didn't have to just rebuild communities, they had to rebuild institutions, governments, police, judges, all had to be rebuilt. So he thought, well, this is a natural guy, but you know what? He hated blacks, and he hated that the Yankees had won the war, and so he got himself impeached. He was the first one, and for high crimes and misdemeanors, and he was impeached by the Congress, but was not convicted by the senators, because you have to have 2/3 majority. With 100, that's 67 votes to actually say you're guilty. So we've had 4 impeachments. We had Johnson, then we had Clinton, and then we had Trump. They have never convicted anybody in an impeachment trial, which is kind of sad. And I told my wife that. I said the Dems are making a big mistake by doing this second impeachment. She said, why? Because he's not going to be convicted by the Senate, and that's a way of saying he's not guilty. Okay? If you're arrested for killing somebody and you're not convicted, are you a murderer? Not legally. Maybe you did the crime, but you got to be convicted. So impeachment is a pretty weak tool, really. But he did get impeached, and it was in the final year of his term. Yes.
Doesn't impeachment mean that they can't run for president again?
No, but that's what they were hoping on this one. If we can kick him out, then we can quickly pass a decree that says you can never run for any public office again. But they failed to impeach him. So, I don't know. Sometimes it's all right now. Politics is all about emotion, isn't it? It's not about logic. It's not about reason. It's about emotion. And emotions are strong in America right now, regardless of what your particular view is. Well, he immediately rescinds this 40 acres and a plow thing, and a mule, 40 acres and a mule. He revokes it after 6 months of it being in place. And you know what? Then what do? If you're one of these black farmers plowing the ground of what used to be your slaveholders' land, and now they say it's not your land, we're giving it back to the original owner. And what do? You got crops in the ground, you got a house. Well, they cut a deal with the landowner, and it's called sharecropping. And the landholder said, look, I can't really farm the land anymore anyway, because I lost my slaves and I lost my sons. There's no way I can farm really anymore without your help. So if you'll farm your 40 acres, it's mine, but you'll have a long-term lease on it. You just give me half or whatever the amount was, half of your crops, and you can live here. Now, sharecropping, I understand, still exists on some tobacco farms in the Carolinas. But so they were able to continue, or others that didn't have land were hired employees on these big estates, and they worked for their former boss. The difference was, oh, it's 5 o'clock, boss, I'm going home now. You know, they were employees and they got a salary, they got a wage. So, but this was serious enough that they put it in the impeachment proceedings. And the next thing he did was he pardoned all Southerners. So we marched in McClellan, or one of these military generals march into your town and say, okay, you're all free. The blacks are free, and you white people, raise your hand. I swear allegiance to the flag of the United States. He made them pledge allegiance to the new government, not the Confederate government, United States. Well, Andrew Johnson pardoned anybody that was a Southerner that had made these promises. Oh, I'm not going to hold you to those. You can still think and act like a Confederate. And so that completely undermined all that was trying to happen. And he appointed governors in the South, in all these cities in the South, and they were supposed to select local officers that would follow the laws of the United States. Instead, they went around and got their old Confederate cronies and put them in as mayor and judge and police lieutenants and whatever. So that was see, all of this is undermining what the U.S. government's trying to do in the South. And in black codes, you had a different system. We don't have time to talk about it. They had different ways of suppressing black votes. And so we had just the opposite happen in this last election. So I'm not saying this actually happened the way I'm unfolding it, but there was a sentiment that said, well, if every poor person could vote, every black poor person can vote, every immigrant, legal or illegal, can vote, they would not vote for Donald Trump. So we've got to massage the voting so that they can vote. And so that's why at 1 o'clock in the morning, Trump had decisively won in all the important states. And then in all those states, they said, oh, wait a minute, time out. We got a broken water line. It was really an overflowing toilet. Oh, no, we got our workers are saying, well, COVID, we got to let our people go home. They can come back tomorrow or next week and we'll finish again. So they took a recess. So here's the marker. This is the Trump vote. This is the Biden vote. So we got to move this to here. I mean, it was as obvious as anyone could see. And what they did is they had put these ballots out there that couldn't be verified, that couldn't be authenticated as to who. It was just a ballot with a check mark on there. And in the old days, we used to call that stuffing the ballot. So all these ballots came in, and so the 75 million people that actually showed up and voted for Donald Trump, all of a sudden. Now, why do you think they stormed the White House? Or the Congress? Why do you think they did that? They felt that they had witnessed illegal or inappropriate activities that took away their vote. My vote doesn't count because we won. And then 3 days later or 3 weeks later, we lost. How does that work? So now, no one's talking like that this today. Why not? I don't know. The Republicans aren't talking like this because they have to face an election in 2 years. They don't want to sound like a bunch of whiny people that won't accept their. But the truth of the matter is that in 6 important states, the voting procedures were massaged, altered, changed, so that anybody that didn't want to take the time to get out of their house and go stand in line and vote could vote and be counted. And they don't even have to say who they really were. It's just a vote, and it came out of this neighborhood, and it's in the box, and we'll count it. So, anyway, I hope that moving forward, you will take a look at voting irregularities and decide what you think is valid. In Nevada, what they decided was valid was send a ballot to every address. And you know what? Maybe who's living there now is a Chinese immigrant that's illegal, and he votes. Why not? The ballot shows up. All it says is check the box and put it in the mailbox, and it'll count. There's no way of verifying who voted. Well, enough of that. So, these were just the opposite. These were ways of suppressing those same populations of people. And we won't talk about it right now, but they had, you know, they had them pay a tax, a voter tax. They had them do a number of things that ordinary people, white people, didn't have to do in order to vote. And then he vetoed the civil rights bill. It was passed by Congress. It says, if you're born here, you're a natural citizen. He said, no! Just being born here in America doesn't make you a citizen. Well, yes it did, because the 15th Amendment comes along shortly thereafter. And so he's nullified. He remains as president, but he's powerless. And so let's go to the, we're going to come back right to here in a minute. Let's go back to page 1 and pick up our lecture where we started. So here you've got a whole population of people that are free, that used to be slaves. And what was the reaction of Confederate whites, those white people in the South? How did they feel about this? Well, they had white trauma. Just like right now today, we have red trauma. What is that? Got a bunch, you got 75 million disgruntled Trump voters who can't believe, they still can't come to terms with the fact that their guy lost the election. It's trauma. They're traumatized. Now the Democrats have a solution. They're going to put all red voters in re-education camps. Teach them how to be good Democrats. You know? I mean, there's actual proposals like that out there on the table. If you didn't vote for Biden, there's something wrong with your head. So we're gonna re-educate you, train you, so that you have a different way of thinking. Well, so they were unable to comprehend that freedom for the Negro was the same as for whites. I just can't comprehend that. You know, these slave families have been in our plantation for 100 years, and now they're supposed to be equal. Man, they couldn't get it. In addition to that, the people in the plantation owners, they had these big plantations. They didn't have anybody to work the fields. 250,000 of their sons and brothers were killed in the war. They didn't come home. Got nobody to work the land. You don't have any slaves anymore. You don't have any. They became masters without slaves, and they would be out in the fields, side by side with their former slaves, planting and harvesting. Now, in the movie Forrest Gump, how many of you saw that movie? That's a great movie on so many levels, okay? Including the Vietnam War, because it captures what happened in Vietnam better than any film I've ever seen. Having been to Vietnam and then seeing all the many films about it, it captures it really well. Bubba Gump and all that stuff. Yeah, well, I don't know where I was going with that. Well, the other problem was white poverty. They had these big, in that film, his mother owned this big plantation house. And the yard was immaculately manicured, and the house was arrayed gorgeously. And how could a woman that doesn't work, whose husband ran off and left her with, and this is all fictional, of course, but how could it be that she could run a plantation home? No slaves, no visible, turned it into a boarding house. And so, in the movie, I saved her, kept her afloat. But white poverty, they had these massive properties, but they weren't worth anything. They were worthless. You couldn't sell them. Nobody would buy them. And if they did buy them, they want to pay you with Confederate money, and that's worthless. They got a whole trunk full of Confederate money. It's not worth anything. Okay? So it's kind of like my joke about what's the word for speaking without preparation? Can't tell a joke if you don't know the names. So anyway, spontaneous. Spontaneous talk is not worth the paper it's written on. You know? Yeah, well, that's a joke. It's not supposed to be written. Contemporary. Okay, well, of necessity, they became planters along with the black hired people. Okay, let's go to the next page. So, who are they going to get to run the South? Are you just going to let the old mayors and the old governors and the old senators and everybody run the new South? No. They were all dismissed from duty, and so African Americans actually had a chance to participate in governance. And as long as Republicans were in charge, and that was clear up to about from 65 all the way up to 90, Republicans were in charge, blacks were treated fairly. They had 14 congressmen, people who went to Washington that were black, 2 senators, all the local offices were represented proportionately by black leaders, which led to more fairness, better benefits, and taxation. But there were 2 other groups of people. There were carpetbaggers and scalawags. Now, what's a carpetbag? Carpetbag, we'd say backpack, but it's about the size of a backpack. But it was made out of a bag that had a crocheted or knitted carpet. So the outside of the bag was a carpet, had carpet materials. It was a carpetbagger. And carpetbaggers were white Northerners, Republicans, abolitionists, hated slavery. They moved to the South and became elected to oversee Reconstruction. That's a carpetbagger. Carpetbagger is somebody who doesn't belong there, but they are allowed to govern. And the greatest example we have in modern history of carpetbagging is Hillary Clinton. What? Hillary Clinton. So her and Bill, they had all of these very difficult years together in the White House with all the scandals and the sex and everything. And she was always supportive of Bill. And she, in effect, said, okay, Bill, so we're leaving the White House next week. And now it's my turn. I've supported you for the last 30 years in public life. Now it's your turn to support me. I'm going to run for public office. And I will be the political figure of the family. And he says, okay, great, Hill. What are you gonna do? I'm running for the Senate. I'm going to be a U.S. Senator. You've never done anything in politics. What makes you think anybody would vote you in as senator? She says, well, my friend from New York is retiring. I'm going to run to fill his vacancy. And he says, but you don't live there. You have to live in the state in order to represent the state. Oh, my friend's going to buy me a house in upstate New York, which he did. Bought her a $2 million house. Bill and Hillary live there even today. And so she met the minimal requirements. She ran for the Senate. She won. And people say that worked with her that she was a very good senator for many years, that she was senator, and then Obama appoints her to be Secretary of in charge of the military and everything. So she goes out, but she is a classic carpetbagger. Okay, now more on her later. As you can tell, I don't have much respect for her. Then there were the scalawags. did your grandma ever call you a little scalawag? Did she?
Yeah.
What's a scalawag?
I have no idea.
Okay, well, a scalawag was a southerner who actually believed in what the North was trying to do. They were southerners, but they were abolitionists, and they wanted the U.S. to come in and clean out the Confederacy, create the South as part of America. Now, who brought the name Dixie to St. George? Was it a scalawag or a carpetbagger? It was a abolitionist southerner, whole bunch of them, 307 families, who hated the South and hated slavery and hated oppression, and they hated the class distinction and everything. Poor whites were as much degraded as were blacks in the South. And these were poor whites, these were working class whites. They came to St. George with the name Dixie. But the name Dixie was to represent everything that they opposed about the South. Okay? No slavery. Okay? So now today they're trying to take out the name Dixie and remove it from our memory and our existence. How many of you came here because it's called Dixie? Be honest. Because it's Dixie State, that's why there was something about it that resonated with you, and so, yeah, I want to go to Dixie State. How many of you, don't be ashamed. We want to erase you politically. How many of you did? Raise your hand. How many of you came here in spite of the fact that it was named Dixie? In spite of, okay? Well, a lot of you feel that way. Well, anyway, we're right in the middle of that, and we'll see how that plays out. The legislature up in Salt Lake has refused to take it up. You know, everybody wants it. All the local people want, all the administrators want it. All the Salt Lake people want it. All the outsiders want it. But the local people don't want it, and so it's frozen in time. If it doesn't get voted on, then it's not going to happen. We'll see. We'll know by Christmas. So anyway, let's see, where are we at? So the Democrats are out. It's all Republicans in the South. All of the leadership is Republican. And it will be for 40 years. Well, that doesn't go well if you're a Democrat, if you're a slave guy. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to prevent the blacks from voting. And we're going to reinstate white supremacy by organizing a group they call the Ku Klux Klan, which in Latin means the circle. And a year after the war ended, in Tennessee, and then very rapidly, all cities in the South had membership in the Ku Klux Klan. Who organized it? White supremacists? Yeah, but they were Democrats, white supremacists. Not Republicans. Republicans didn't want anything to do with it. Well, they wore their masks and their pointed hoods, and they suppressed blacks through violence and intimidation, including lynchings. Do you know that there were public lynchings in America until 1952? Now, there was a type of a lynching that happened exactly 1 year ago today in the South. Can't remember, it might be Florida. 2 men in a pickup truck followed a black man that was jogging, and they cornered him and they killed him. Remember that story? And they were both arrested. They're in jail now, pending a trial for murder. So that's a type of lynching, where you would follow somebody that was black, and then you'd hang them, or you'd put a rope around their neck and you'd drag them behind a pickup truck until they were dead. I mean, it's just horrible, atrocious kinds of things. And there was never any justice. They got away with it. And that's what they did. And I'll give you some examples. In Louisiana in 1973, this is 8 years after the war, they took cannons and guns and went into a community and just slaughtered blacks. No accountability, no trials. It wasn't until LBJ in about 1968 began to enforce strict laws to suppress the KKK. He publicly renounced the Klan. He arrested 4 Klansmen. They went to prison. But there weren't 4 Klansmen in America. There were 400,000 Klansmen in America. So it was a token expression. And then he passed the Civil Rights Act, or the Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, and he signed it into law in about 1968. Correct me if you know better. About 1968. And that granted the blacks many more freedoms. Now, they got the freedom to vote 100 years before and never really had a chance to see fruition because of the KKK and all those terrible things that were happening in the South. So anyway, so I thought, now who was it that we know were actually members of the Klan? So I did some research. Number one name that came up was a guy by the name of Harry S. Truman. It broke my heart because he's Democrat, but he was my favorite president other than Lincoln and Jefferson and Washington and the big names. But he was my favorite modern, might say modern, it's been almost, it's been many years. But he was a Klansman. He was a senator from Missouri. And as I researched it, I found out, oh yeah, if you're a senator from Missouri, you're going to need all the white voters. And the only way you're going to court the white vote is to affiliate with the Klan. And so he was, I guess, at least in name only, a member of the Klan. The President of the United States. Klansman. There was a Supreme Court justice, congressman, 3 governors. We're going to play this clip here in a minute on segregation now and forever. But before we do, oh no, first we're going to play this one. The most significant public official, he was in the Senate for over 40 years. A guy by the name of Robert Byrd. Well, he was a Klansman his whole life, even while he was in public office. We're going to show you a Meet the Press Sunday morning program with Robert Byrd, okay? Hillary Clinton says, he was my mentor. Now, remember, she's a new person in the Senate, doesn't know much about it. So she latches on to Robert Byrd and she says, oh yeah, he was the best. He was my mentor. Can we play that? Oh yeah, you got it. Now this is disturbing, and I don't mean to disturb people, and this is not the way I talk or think, but it was certainly the way Robert Byrd talked. Go for it.
Race relations. They're much, much better than they've ever been in my lifetime. I think this is my personal opinion, I think we talk about race too much. I think those problems are largely behind us.
Oh yeah.
I think we can all profit by our mistakes. I think we've reached a new plateau, and I think it's going to keep.
Now listen to this. This is so shocking.
And race relations, but I think I just think we talk so much about it that we help to, I think, create somewhat of an illusion.
An illusion of racism. I know I'm hurting some of your feelings. I apologize.
My old mom told me, Robert, you can't go to heaven if you hate anybody. We practice that. There are white niggers.
What?
I've seen a lot of white niggers in my time. I'm going to use that word. But we just need to work together to make our country better. And I just quit talking about it so much.
Now, after our conversation Friday, I went back to visit with Senator.
So, can you imagine a public official using that kind of language? It's just shocking. And Hillary Clinton, that's her hero in the Senate. He's from West Virginia, and he was known as the King of Pork. He steered money to West Virginia and created over 50 buildings and facilities, including this Junior College in West Virginia has his name on it. There's 50 parks, roads, bridges, buildings with Robert Byrd's name on it. How many of those names are being removed from those buildings? 0. Yet in California you got Jefferson and Washington and Lincoln. Those high schools, the names are all being changed because they obviously were racists. But Robert Byrd, he can have names, his name and his wife's name on all these buildings. So all I'm saying is, when you look at something that's happening, look for hypocrisy. Look for hypocrisy. For example, Trump is elected president, and Hillary says the next day, the reason he's president is because he colluded with the Russians. How many years did we have the Russian collusion thing? 3 years. They had inquiries, investigations, and finally a trial. And finally, what was the conclusion? No, he didn't collude with the Russians. Hillary did. And I love the movie Dumb and Dumber. I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? And this is an old political trick. If you're doing something that is distasteful or wrong, just accuse your opponent of doing it. And keep accusing your opponent, and that will deflect any attention. So Hillary Clinton says Russia, 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 because she had all this nasty stuff going on with her computer and everything. And so here's the hypocrisy. So the FBI director says he takes 1 week and looks at all the Hillary Clinton stuff and says, there's no crime here, let's move on. And then at the same time, Trump's not even elected yet. He uses the FBI, the CIA, and all the powers of government on a witch hunt for Trump to find something to nail Trump with. And so always look for hypocrisy, because very often politicians will accuse their opponent of something that they are guilty of themselves. And this happens on both sides. I'm not just singling out Democrats. Republicans do the same thing. I want to show you Governor Wallace. And he later ran for president. He was nearly assassinated. He was shot and was in a wheelchair when he ran for president. But this is, okay, so Alabama. Okay, oh yeah, we'll talk about Alabama. Who's the best football team in the world? Historically? University of Alabama. They win about every third year, don't they, the national title? So let's see what was going on in Alabama with George Wallace when he was governor.
Best news in...
Are we having fun? I am. I was going to give you a quiz.
I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate.
Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy.
This very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, that today we sound the drum for freedom, as have our generation of forebears before us done time and again down through history. Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us, and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now,
What?
segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Okay. Governor of the great state of Alabama. You can see why he got shot, you know. Well, anyway, I have another clip we won't show, and that's he's standing on the front porch, linked arms with others, to prevent 5 black students. The Supreme Court said they should be allowed to go to the University of Alabama and get their education. And he's standing at the front gate, preventing these black students from coming in, and the National Guard troops roll in and push him out of the way and let these black students go in. Now, if I'm a Alabama grad, I'm really grateful that they let those students in, because now They rule football. Could they rule football without their black athletes? I don't think so. So anyway, it's funny, isn't it, how history unfolds in different ways. Well, in fairness, are there Republicans? Are there Republicans in history that were Klansmen? Answer is no. But there were some that talked a dialogue that drew Klansmen to them. One was a guy by the name of David Duke. He was never really, he was an independent, identified with the Republicans, ran for president twice, and he was definitely a racist, okay? Then there's Senator Strom Thurmond, who made many racist remarks, and then there was the independent congressman, Ron Paul. Have you heard of Ron Paul? He's from Texas. And he wrote a pamphlet filled with racist stuff. Now, have you heard of, is the name Paul? Ring a bell? Rand Paul. Yeah, he's a congressman, he's a senator now in Tennessee, or Kentucky, in Kentucky. But guess what? He's not, I don't think he's a racist, but his dad is. His dad's a big time racist. And so, the big shift came when LBG signed the Civil Rights Act. And since that day, black people have looked to Democrats as their salvation, not the Republicans. It was actually the Republicans gave them freedom and opened up the South and all that. But with that one signature, they switched allegiance over to the Democrats. And sadly, as a historian, I can say this: Democrats have never done anything for the blacks, except talk. Black lives don't matter to Democrats. Only black votes matter. Has anything changed in the years since we've had Black Lives Matters for black people? Can you name one thing? Well, there's lots of cute little PR things. You know, I'm a big basketball fan. Made by blacks in America. You know, on the NBA T-shirts. Well, yes. But other than that kind of publicity kinds of things, is anything changing? Has it ever changed? They vote for Democrats who make all these promises. They go to Washington and do nothing for the blacks. Really, as a historian, the first president that really did anything for the blacks was Donald Trump. You say, how can that be? Oh, you're going to put his name here, right? You're going to add him to the list of Republican racists? Oh, he's a racist. He's a big-time racist. He is? Oh, yeah, everybody knows he's a racist. Kanye West? How many of you, be honest, how many of you have Kanye in your music file? Does he think Donald Trump's a racist? No, they're best friends. What about Herschel Walker? Does he think that he's the greatest running back since Jim Brown? Does he think? No, he's best friends with Donald Trump. Oh, here's the really good one. Tiger Woods. Does Tiger Woods think Donald Trump's a racist? Tiger Woods did more. We're talking about what Democrats don't do and what Republicans do. He went into the country club in Georgia and he says, I'm Tiger Woods. I'm going to play at your all-white golf course, and all blacks are now going to be able to play at any golf course they want. He single-handedly reversed that racial policy of no blacks allowed. Oh, what happened to Tiger today? Anybody know? Yeah, he rolled his car, didn't he? He's going to be okay. He hurt his legs, but yeah. So be careful with the R word, because Trump said, "Hey, what? You ought to vote for me, not the Democrats." Not, pardon my swearing. He said, "What the hell have they ever done for you? You blacks need to vote for me." And he got 20% of the vote. And right away, he took black unemployment from 27%. That's 1 in 4 blacks not working, down to 7% not working. He took them out of poverty. The poverty, blacks in poverty rose up. No more poverty, no more food stamps, no more welfare. He gave them good, honest, hard-working jobs. He opened up the oil fields. He opened up other industries that employ high levels of blacks. More black ownership of property and housing. And the list goes on. And yet, the Democrats, in my opinion, have never done anything to help black people. Shame on them. They're calling Trump the racist. Now, you might have a counter argument and you might have some good points to make. But my point is this. There's hypocrisy on both sides of the aisle. And don't buy it just because it's in the news, just because somebody says something. Look into it for yourself. Make your own decision. If Trump's a racist and you're convinced of that, more power to you. You have that right. You have that. I don't think it's a right. I think it's an obligation to find out for yourself. Don't let me or the news media or some Hollywood star influence your opinion about somebody when it comes to matters of race. Well, let's go back. Now suppose, so the summary. During Reconstruction until the 1990s, so long as the Republicans controlled the South, the blacks had significant power and the federal government protected their rights. I'm not saying that. Who says that? Look on the board and tell me. I want an answer.
Textbook?
Who?
Is it the textbook?
The textbook. And this guy's a classic liberal. You know, he's not pro-Trump. He hates Trump. Okay? This is a guy who looks at things objectively for the most part. And he says, Johnson was a creep, and the Republicans, not LBJ, the first Johnson, Andrew Johnson, and they helped improve conditions for black people. Is there more work to be done on race relations? Oh yeah, we haven't even begun. But we need to, and whose responsibility is that? Is that my responsibility? No. Nobody listens to me, look at you. There's the evidence. But will they listen to you? Your voice is much more important than any other voice. Your generation is going to decide about race relations, all other inequities in America. So how did the North feel? Oh, let's hear my music. I love this. This is a great song. Now, I've been known to cruise the boulevard, haven't I, James, in my Porsche, and I put on a, oh, I should have brought it down. I have a baseball cap with a ponytail hanging out of the back, and I take the top off and roll down the windows, and I crank this up. I love, it's one of my favorites. Let's crank it.
You want the video with it?
Yeah, if you got a video, we'll take it. So what was happening in the North? Well, all that was going on in the South. I love this song. Now you can dance, just not on the table, please.
That's the way you do it. Play the guitar on the MTV.
That ain't working. It's the way you do it. Checks for free. Now, I thought it was check, you know, paycheck. Chicks for free. Now we don't follow this in our culture today, right? Money for nothing and shit for free. Who's the breadwinner these days? Mom or dad?
Mom.
Mom! We got 25 women in here and we got 8 guys in here. Who's the one? Where's your guy, girl? They're playing video games. It ain't working. That's the way to do it. You got me a woman. She's gonna work. She's gonna take good care of me. My wife works part-time. Does your wife work?
She's my sugar mom. She's my sugar mom.
She is a sugar woman. She runs a support network for elderly people in the county with food and health care, and she's in charge of the whole county. She's quite a woman. I was telling them about her near Chicago. She was that cute little girl who used to come over to the house when you were a teenager.
That's right.
And now you're married. Okay. We gotta move these microwave ovens. So anyway, that's good. So here's my joke. So the guy's about ready to graduate. He comes home and says, honey, I found the best job today. She says, oh really? Tell me about it. Great benefits, great pay, profit sharing, benefits package, retirement, the whole package. It's just awesome. She said, oh honey, I am so happy. And he said, I knew you'd like it. You start Monday. Okay. Well, we got to change that, you know? We got to change it. I admire women that are making a life for themselves and building their own careers. Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I taught all my children to do that. But what was the North thinking? So the South is just devastated. It's all burned up. You got all this rebuilding going on. You got all this social problems in the South. What was happening in the North? Lights out. They were making money hand over fist. Major industrial revolution going on that created excessive wealth. By 1890, 1% of the population had 99% of the stuff. How much different is that today? It's not. The 1% have all the stuff today. The other 99%, we all have to struggle to get a little piece of it. Well, what about Russia? Now, there's a completely communist, everybody's equal kind of deal going on there. Same thing. 1% has all the wealth in Russia. What about Cuba, Venezuela, France? It's a fact of China. It's a fact of life. The 1% have all the wealth. That isn't fair. Why don't we pass a bunch of laws that say you can't do that? Why don't we do that in America?
The 1% will leave.
Yeah. They'll go to some island somewhere in the South Pacific and run our businesses from there. And then we don't get any taxes. It's a gift. Making money is a gift. And those that have that ability, you should thank, because they create the jobs for the rest of us. I mean, we can have class envy and we can try to change laws and change tax rates, but like you say, they're smarter than any government. They're not going to be taken down by government. Oh, you could shoot them, I guess. But about the same time, the Statue of Liberty arrives. Thank you from the French. Bring your huddled masses yearning to be free. They open all of this prosperity in the North. Oh, that's great. If I'm a former slave in the South, great. I'm going to go to Chicago. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to work in a factory. I'm going to make a lot of money. Is that what happened? No. Thank you, France. We took the European immigrants, and they took all those jobs. And again, the black population are relegated to service jobs. Housekeepers, gardeners, service jobs. Okay. J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Carnegie. You know, any one of these three people, they have foundations now. They're all dead, of course. They've been dead for a long time. But their foundations are so prosperous that you could not spend enough money fast enough to deplete it. Because on interest and investments, they just keep growing. Their holdings grow every year. And to their credit, they spend a lot of that money on what?
Charity.
Charities. And the kind of charities that would normally be overlooked, like the arts, things like that. So, you know, we can get in, if you want to get off on class warfare, let's have a whole lesson on socialism. Now, socialism is the vision of the future, and it's the hope of America, socialism. So we could have a lesson on that, but the problem is it's a lie. Freedom is the hope of, and when you have freedom, you have prosperity. When you have prosperity, you have certain individuals that rise to the top. Now, the legislature can rise up and pass antitrust laws and such to prevent monopolies. If you work for Silicon Valley right now, what should you be afraid of? Amazon, yeah. What should Amazon be afraid of?
An antitrust.
Antitrust. I'm going to break them up. They're too rich, they're too powerful, they have a monopoly. Every storefront on Main Street is closed. Thank you, Amazon, we're done. You know, I mean, governments do play a role, but again, it's limited. So what kind of, so this brought the leisure class out of the plantations, not the same people, but the leisure class is no longer the plantation owner. He's out in the field, working beside his former slaves, just to etch out a living. But these imperial giants become the wealthy class, the leisure class. And they do a lot of things that the plantation owners did that are not in the best interest of society. Look what happened, science. You got industrial prosperity, excessive wealth, you've got scientific, Edison, he invents the phonograph, the light bulb, motion pictures, electricity, General Electric. How many of you own stock in General Electric? None of you. How about your parents? Ford comes along and invents the automobile, mass production. What do you think, how much do you think it costs to buy one share of Ford Motor Company? And they're on the rise. They're prospering and they're innovating. And General Electric or General Motors, same thing. General Motors says in 15 years they'll only make electric cars, nothing else. How much would it cost to buy one share of stock in General Electric, General Motors, Ford? Between $6 and $8 per share. Now, General Electric, they make all of the nuclear power plants. They make turbine engines that go on aircraft and outer space stuff. I mean, these guys have got it going. Costs you about $6 a share. You buy 100 shares for $600. And what about, the electric car, what's it called?
Tesla.
Tesla. How much would one share of Tesla cost you?
It's like $300, right?
Yeah, $300. And the Teslas aren't nearly as reliable as the Fords. They're learning. They're working on it. But wouldn't you rather have 100 shares of Tesla than 100 shares of General Motors? Yeah. But you see, that's the thing about the stock market. It's all about perception. It's not necessarily about reality. It's basically Las Vegas on steroids. It's gambling with your own money or somebody else's, okay? But all of this contributes to the massive wealth that comes along. Now, we got time for one more section, and that is, so you got white America, you got black America, both North and South. What about red America? What's happening to red America during this period of time, after the Civil War? Let's go to that last page. Freedom was not possible for Native Americans yet. And they were encouraged to adapt to modern ways, be white, look white, act white, talk white, and then maybe you'll get some privilege. General Philip Sheridan in 1869 set out to destroy the Indian economy. He went into the prairie states and wiped out all the buffalo, all the horses, burned villages, killed little children, women, just massacred Indians by the thousands. Now, the buffalo thing was something that a lot of people were hoping for. Who would want to see the buffalo disappear from the plains?
Farmers.
Farmers, because you had prairie land farmers, homesteaders that were down there, and they were putting up fencing all over the Great Plains, you know. Does a barbed wire fence stop a herd of buffalo? Doesn't even slow them down, you know. So they have all their crops in the ground, the buffalo come through and just tear up everything. What about the railroads? Why would they be glad to see the buffalo go? Huh? Sorry?
They hit them with the train.
Yeah. If they were moving across the railroad track, you just have to stop and wait until they move, because you don't have enough power in that locomotive to plow through the buffalo. Yeah. So anyway, I had a thought come. If you're looking for a how the West was won kind of film, a good one is, although it's R-rated for violence, was Open Range. Anybody seen that movie? Open Range with Costner and Duvall. Well, it's an excellent movie. And it describes the growing tension between permanent settlers and ranchers. See, once the buffalo are gone, then the ranchers take over the prairie lands. And that's the grazing land for all the cattle coming out of Texas and other places. So it's all changing. How many of you are ashamed tonight to be an American? Yeah, you are? I'll drink to that. Hey, should I not be talking about the dark side? Should I only talk about the good things? The good things far outweigh the bad. But you can't just brush the bad under the carpet. You've got to acknowledge. And once you acknowledge, then change is possible. Okay? So, the Oklahoma, the Dawes Act broke up. Oh, so then there's Nez Perez. Oh, let's do Cherokee Nation. One song. This is another one of my favorite songs. Now listen to the words. Listen to the words. Because this describes the plight of the American Indians in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So as white America expands and the Native Americans are in their way, they're just saying, just move them out, get rid of them. Now this general, he was least honest. He just, we'll just rob them, we'll just kill them. Okay, go ahead.
Took away our ways of life.
handmade jewelry now comes from Japan.
Cherokee people, Cherokee tribe, so proud to live.
You gotta admire
So proud
musical talent. I just love music. Any of you play in a band? Oh, you have your own band upstairs. I know I can hear you from my house. Anybody else? Still part Redman inside, he says.
Cherokee people, Cherokee tribe, so proud to live, so proud to die.
Now the big closing verse.
Maybe someday when
This gives me chills.
Cherokee nation will return, will return, will return, will return, will return.
Awesome. Way to go. Paul Revere and the Raiders. So, anyway, back to my notes. So, we've done a lot of talking tonight. During this period of time was a revolutionary time. Freedom started breaking out all over. What was the way in the 1700s and the early 1800s is expanding to include more people in this circle of freedom. Okay? Nez Perce, French for pierced nose. Well, I don't know. You're wearing a mask. I always wanted one of those.
I'm glad you didn't do it.
You glad I didn't?
Yeah.
No, I want a big one. I want a big hoop right there.
Do it.
Big enough so my wife can snap the dog collar on there. You know, that'd be good. Oh, and I want a tattoo. I definitely want a tat. I mean, I'm watching all these basketball players with all their tats. So I want a big skull and crossbones right here. Okay? And then underneath I want the inscription, I have AIDS in case I ever go to prison. Okay? That's good, huh? One more. I got one more. I got one more tattoo. This is my favorite of all. I want the tattoo artist right here on my hip to tattoo a barcode that links to my bank account. Okay? Then when the IRS comes around looking for more money, I can just do this. Swipe this and just stop. I'm sorry, was that inappropriate? I hope that wasn't inappropriate. I have a sick mind. Have you figured that out yet? Okay. Well, anyway, freedom's going to come. Freedom came to the blacks, and their struggle wasn't over. 150 years later, their struggle still isn't over. Now, I just ask you this. What are you doing to make it better for minorities? Black, brown, red. What are you doing? Do you have an inclusive kind of attitude and behavior? Do you look for ways? Do you ever, when you're, and we don't do this anymore, but years ago we used to sit together over here in the snack bar, and people would be, do you ever just look for somebody that's sitting alone and go and sit down and say, hey, mind if I sit down? So tell me about yourself. Why are you here? What's going on? You know, do we try? Do we just settle into our own little ways and our own little groups? Nez Perce says, let me be a free man, free to travel, to stop, free to work, to trade where I choose, free to think and talk and act for myself. Well, in 1887, 10 years later, the Dawes Act broke up nearly all tribal lands into small segments to be used by white settlers. And individual families of Indians who were willing to farm and adapt to the white man ways. We'll let you have your little farm. But you got to look and act like a white man. The Oklahoma land rush, you familiar with that story? 120 years ago. Everybody lined up on the Oklahoma line. Now, Oklahoma was reserved for the Native Americans, but the Indian Act took away all the reservations. Took them away, and they gave this land to whoever could get there on a wagon, horse, and buggy to stake it off and claim it. All those Indian reservations were taken away, 2 million acres of it. And they lined up and they said, okay, at 8 o'clock in the morning, we're going to fire a cannon and it's everybody go. And I've seen, we have actual footage, motion picture footage of all these people just racing out into the prairie land. So we're gonna relocate them, and then we're gonna culturally indoctrinate them. In 1871, they eliminated the treaty system that had been negotiated over 200 years and just nullified all the treaties. And they sent all the children to boarding schools, okay? So they'd go down into Arizona or wherever, they'd round up all the school-age children and haul them away to a boarding school where they would immediately cut their hair, take away their native clothing, everybody dressed a certain way, they weren't allowed to use their native language. And this happened well into the last century. I remember in 1958 I was a celebrity on a local television program. We used to go out on public events. I went with a group of guys up there that represent this TV program. And we went up there and they were having a dance. And this is a true story. And I danced with the Indian girls that night, and then it rained for 3 days. It really did. I don't know if there was a correlation there. But these poor kids. Now, how many of you are from northern Utah? Have you ever driven up to Brigham City on I-15? And there's a big eye on the mountain. Have you ever wondered what that eye is? Anybody ever tell you what it was? Indian school. Until the 1950s, little children were sent there, and they were there for 9 months, and then they go back to their tribal places in the summer. But they were trying to indoctrinate Native Americans into being Americans, okay? Not Native Americans. Well, they rebelled. Little Bighorn, you know that, Custer's Last Stand. They actually won. Chief Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. And the very first day of class, I told you a story about Chief Sitting Bull claiming to have a revelation of Jesus Christ, and how Jesus Christ told him that the native ways could come back if they would do their dance. And they're still doing it. They're still doing, what do they call that dance? It's the ghost dance. Ghost dance, okay? Sitting Bull said, the life my people want is a life of freedom, political autonomy, preserving our own customs and control of our own lands. So that was there. Is that the end of my notes? Oh, we got one more little page? Okay, let's do that. So what did they seek that that nobody else was seeking? The same thing, right? And over 300 years, gradually, they had seen their lands, their rights, their culture taken away from them by these invaders. Other tribes sought for spiritual solace to relieve their desperation, including the ghost dance ritual. Leaders foretold the day when the whites would disappear and the buffalo would return, and they could again practice their ancestral customs. In the 1973, 200 Lakotas reoccupied the town of Wounded Knee for 71 days in the heartland of America. Have you ever heard of Wounded Knee, the Battle at Wounded Knee? Federal troops came in, of course, took them all out, wiped them out. That was pretty much in our time. FBI and federal marshals. 1 killed, 2 wounded. 2 activists, 2 hippies in their hippie van disappeared. They didn't find the van. They didn't find the activists. They're just gone. Did they die? Whatever, I'm not sure. Well, to make a long story short, they protested a gas pipeline that was going through their, what they considered to be their tribal burial grounds. And Trump, on the first couple of weeks in office, said, "We're not doing that. Dig it up. We're going. The pipeline's going in," and he put the pipeline in. And then, of course, a lot of those workers were Native Americans, but the jobs that came in that region. Well, eventually they're going to get their citizenship, but it wasn't until they're the last ones, except maybe women. They're the last ones. All of these groups, they're all seeking the same thing, but can we do it in a way where we can all get along, share in the freedoms? We're closer now. I've told you these terrible stories. We're closer now than we've ever been. You're going to make it even better. You're going to push it over the top. So let's watch Jim Thorpe. Short video clip. Anybody ever heard of Jim Thorpe? Who is he?
He's like the, I did like a report in like 5th grade on I remember doing that.
What is he, a scholar? What is he?
Honestly, I completely forgot, but I know his name.
He's an athlete. And some say he's the greatest athlete to ever live. Jim Thorpe. And he's the poster child of Native Americans. Okay, and we're going to watch just a short video on him. We'll leave on a positive note. So what's going to happen next week?
The test.
I know some of you are in a hurry to get your work done. Turn those in right now. We can get those graded. If you got work you need to turn in. Jim
In
Thorpe.
1950, sports writers from across the United States voted on who they thought was the greatest American athlete of the century. To be honest, after 5 decades of sporting greatness, they had a galaxy of sports stars to choose from, but one shone brightest, the incomparable Jim Thorpe. Football, baseball, basketball player, and the first Native American to achieve Olympic gold glory. Thorpe was a member of the Sac and Fox Nation and was born on Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma in 1888. His native name, Watho Huck, meant bright path, hinting at great things to come. And at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School,
We did that.
Stood head and shoulders above his peers,
Remember?
breaking the high jump record at the first attempt, sweeping the judges off their feet in competitive ballroom, and leading the school's football team to the National Collegiate Championship. Pop Warner, a coach at Carlisle, knew a world beater when he saw one.
How
And
many of you
in
played Pop Warner
1912,
football?
at the Stockholm Olympics in Sweden, 24-year-old Thorpe competed for the United States in the pentathlon and decathlon, the toughest individual sports of all, involving multiple track and field events over several punishing days. Despite wearing mismatched footwear after a rival stole his sneakers, he won gold in both and received a hero's welcome back home, going on to become the only man to play pro baseball with the New York Giants, pro basketball with the world-famous Indians, and pro football, winning the 1919 championship with a stunning 95-yard punt. So why did it take almost a century for Thorpe to feature on a Wheaties box? It could be because, 2 months after the Olympics, he was stripped of his medals for breaking the competition's strict amateur rules by making money from minor league baseball. Medals that were never given back. It could be that Thorpe shied away from publicity, a Native American who didn't want to be gazed upon as a curiosity, or that America simply wasn't ready to accept the Native American as an all-time great. After all, in 1951, Hollywood made a movie about Thorpe's life, but cast a white actor in the lead role. Thorpe died penniless in 1953, but his story lives on. The story of an all-around, all-American athlete, and truly, one of a kind.
So where but America could that story have happened? You know what I'm saying? Well, thank you all for being here. God bless America. We need